welcome to We Never Met, the podcast where I have interesting strangers on every single week. Today, from the farm itself, we have FL Morris. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good, Sam. How are you?
I'm good. So just to give people a little bit of background on what you do currently, so we have sort of a jumping off point, can you give a little bit of history on your farm and what you do there?
My mother, Gail, and I bought our farm in 2007. We named it Grassroots Farm. I'm located about an hour south of Madison, Wisconsin, in central Greene County. And we've had really a whole evolution from very simple the first year of just renting our 40-acre pasture to a family to graze their cattle and managing thistle and other invasive species, all the way to, progressing to a pretty extensive business plan with a lot of different marketing channels and crops, including over 50 varieties of certified organic vegetables. But also at one point in time, I had pastured lamb. I was raising hogs for pork and breeding them. We've almost always had cattle grazing our hillside pasture, but I've also raised geese for eggs and meat and turkeys for meat, chickens for eggs and meat birds as well. And I know I'm forgetting something. Oh, we used to have a couple donkeys out here. So, just jokingly, I say, yeah, it is. It's like I had farm ADD. I just kind of wanted to try everything and offer like a full diet CSA. It's sometimes referred to, where you offer your customers almost every product that they would need to eat, aside from coffee and chocolate. So now it's evolved a lot, right? So like I said, we purchased this land in 2007. I had 5 years farming experience at that time. Now it's 2021. That was a while ago. A lot has changed out here. Really been selling into a food system that's super challenging to make a profit as a small scale producer, but also really challenging if part of your own mission as a farmer is to increase the access and who has access to your food, right? It's a really awkward dynamic to realize that you need to go into affluent markets to keep your business afloat, to catch the prices that you need to survive. But that also basically completely cuts out low income folks. So that was always awkward for me. And I have to say, I couldn't figure it out alone. It's really influenced how I spend my time now in trying to develop a local food system with others that would present a both profitable but also fair opportunity for people in a local community have access to food, but also fair markets for those farmers in that community, right? That we don't need to eject this produce 100 miles or 150 miles to Chicago. What about the people in Greene County? So I've really pivoted my focus to use some of that experience to just basically develop a new food system that might encourage beginning producers to actually get into this business. So there still are vegetable farmers and that their food is distributed more equitably.
Yeah. What does that new system look like for that you're talking about? Like how is it, how have you changed and developed it over time to create something that is both sustainable for you and the community as well?
Yeah, cool. Thanks for asking, because that is like the main passion here, but it's connected to other parts of my story. So somewhat as a result of the pandemic last year, but also as a result of, many other farmers coming to the same conclusion that I have, is that it's really difficult to stay small and be profitable enough to keep going. These conversations have actually been happening for years in our community. But as a result of the pandemic and a very good friend having to pivot and close her local food restaurant, a group of farmers and folks that worked at that local food restaurant got together to talk about forming a cooperative business to basically take the idea of CSA and convert the, raw produce that would generally, that's typically distributed with a CSA share, convert that into ready to eat prepared meals and use a lot of the kind of principles or structure of community supported agriculture, CSA, to do our distribution. So that's my main focus right now, is a startup cooperative that is owned by both producers, so both farmers and workers, who, generally speaking, the relationship between chefs and farmers, it can work out really well, but it can also be really challenging. And this is a way to not only incorporate eaters and their feedback and their buy-in and their trust and provide this totally awesome, affordable service to them, but it's also a way to kind of work on structures for the folks making the meals and the folks growing the food to kind of have a structure, right? And have seats at the table, so to speak, and for relationships to be worked out and worked through so they feel fair rather than just ending abruptly, which is often the case when things don't work out between a producer and a chef. It's also, I say the word chef. Sometimes that implies, you put the word local food and you put the word chef together and people are just like, oh, that's expensive. But that's the thing, we're structuring this co-op based, as many co-ops are structured, we operate at cost, right? We're not a nonprofit. We're a for-profit entity. We operate at cost because all of our workers, all of our farmers, all of our supply chain partners are getting paid fairly. And then what's left over is getting distributed to the membership or ultimately affects the price points for the customers, right? It's based on costs. So it's a different model. There's actually not even a lot of examples of farmers and workers getting together in one food system business, but here we are. It's pretty exciting. It's fantastic. And honestly, this has been my passion, is figuring out the economic kind of vitality and profitability and in something to encourage people into getting into organic farming, but also to have a food access piece, which it's not only about affordable meal shares and grocery add-ons with Community Kitchen Co-op, which is the name of our new co-op. It's also about a community-funded meal share program. So an opportunity for folks to chip in to get these meals to our local food pantries and distributed to folks in need. So it's kind of like my dream scenario right now.
Yeah, no, that's great, because it's just so for my own knowledge, and everyone else, I think people know what or have heard the acronym like CSA, but like what actually is that, just so everyone's on the same page with that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for asking. We just throw that acronym around sometimes, like people know what we're talking about, but if you don't, you don't. So ultimately, CSA is a program of local food distribution that a farmer runs, where essentially it's a method of kind of sharing the risk with eaters. Okay. So it's like a direct marketing model. The farmer is engaging directly with the customers, and, there's all kinds of creative ways to approach it, but the basic gist of it is in the early part of the growing season, which for us in Wisconsin is, January, February, March. We have put together what our CSA offerings are, which, typically do include vegetables that we grow, but also other opportunities to buy products from the farm or from other local producers. We put together a list of options, and then we share that out. We do our own marketing ourselves, and we pull in people who are willing to pay up front and then receive their investment back in the form of those food shares. So it's generally speaking, it's a box of produce that's varied, right, from week to week, that's been harvested, washed, and packed, and it goes into a neighborhood delivery site or is picked up from the farm by the customer. And generally speaking, every customer gets the same thing, right? It's not a custom order box, although some people do structure their CSAs that way. So that's kind of the general concept. And in our area, through season extension techniques like using hoop houses, we can offer CSA or be growing crops from March through December. What it does for farmers is it gets in income before harvest, which is totally crucial. And it also allows us some flexibility to distribute what's available and have some flexibility to choose what is in those produce boxes. That's really key for us because there's so many elements that factor into what our yields are, what our harvest looks like when it's available, that it's kind of a nice flexibility to have CSA customers who are just along for the ride, right? That they're willing to accept anything that comes in their fresh produce box that week. But it's also really stressful. And for someone who's been doing it for a while, and I feel like I do a pretty good job at it, it's a lot of stress to produce a large volume of food that's varied and the right amount of it, and to be dealing with customers who have kind of different needs and wants, and to be nailing it every single week. And I say that, but there's supposed to be some flexibility built in there. But the way that we as farmers have kind of, naturally competed with each other for the same kind of subset of local foodies, we have a lot of those flexibilities, and that shared risk has kind of like left the building. And when someone has a crappy season, or maybe is more of a beginner and still figuring out variety and quantity, and maybe didn't do the greatest planning or whatever, people will just leave that CSA and go to someone else, so it's kind of lost its function in a way for farmers and for how it was originally designed to be. And it's more customer centric, which is like important, but without that messaging of how we need a break, we've got climate change, we've got, it's difficult to find workers. The economics of it are already tough. We can't produce a bunch of parsley for 79 cents or whatever it is at the grocery store. We just can't, because we're harvesting with our hands. We're planting with our hands. We might have a simple piece of equipment, but we're not growing 1,000 acres of parsley where it costs, 2 cents to make that bunch come to reality. But yet those are the price points that, customers compare local food with, right? They say it's so expensive compared to what they can get at, Pick and Save or Kroger or whatever. So a large part of our job as local food producers is education, kind of having to defend our price points and explain how, we as consumers vote with every dollar. That a very important vote with a dollar is in a food system, right? Because, I'm committed to using local partners. That means that dollar stays here. I don't get the cheapest stuff from the farthest place, right? I don't use Amazon. I will go to the hardware store that is also a co-op and, purchase a tool there because, those are my values. So when someone buys something from me, they're also, investing in my values as a person making business decisions, right? And that's like part of the education that it's really required of us as farmers to kind of defend our price points. So
that has to get exhausting though over time. It's just having to like defend pricing this higher because it needs to be. Yeah,
it is. And, this model is really complicated too, right? I mentioned, 50 vegetable crops. They all have different, periods of time, or different time needs, equipment needs. The harvest times are different. Like everyone is varied, right? It's not like having one product that you create and what your expenses and your variables are. It's very hard to even track what our prices should be. A lot of farmers who are really good at farming, they don't know what they do. They have to go at it like, I'm going to grow as efficiently as I can. I'm going to hire the best people I can find. And hopefully in the end, I make money. But a lot of the time, we don't make money in the end, even though we've been kind of battling or defending being called out for having too high prices at our farmers markets. Like after a year of that, and then looking at your books and finding out you lost $100 on your business that year. I mean, the way that I think of that is like, you just paid $100 to do all of that work for the whole year to get healthy food into people's bodies. And it was challenging and it was stressful. And, to hear when a business like a farm business operates at a loss, I'm just like, wow, how does that feel? I mean, I know how it happens to me a lot, right? But it's not creating a whole movement of people who want to do this, I guess, is really the crux of it. So
yeah. And sort of off the back of that, you're a first generation farmer. So what got you interested in taking that route and purchasing a plot of land and farming? And I don't know your extended family and stuff like that, but I'm assuming there wasn't a ton of farmers in your family.
Well, I mean, this is a generalization, but you only go a couple generations back for anyone, and folks were farmers, right? Because it had to be. Farming was part of surviving, and everyone did a little bit of it, or someone in the family did. I'm first generation because neither my parents nor grandparents were farmers or had access to a land base or an interest, right? But going 3 generations back, we do have some farming background in the state of Missouri, as my family says. I know that's kind of the country bumpkin way to say Missouri, but I don't know how else to say it. So we do have a farming background. in that far back. And then there was a greenhouse business on the other side of my grandparents' family where they raised like poinsettias and Easter lilies. So there's like a little bit of green thumb, but ultimately I didn't grow up having access to knowledge from a parent or a grandparent, any knowledge related to anything related to farming, and also no land-based or equipment inherited, right? So first generation. That being said, my mother and I are farm partners, and we kind of have a yin and yang thing going on. She keeps the books and has the really solid off-farm job that kind of picks up the slack of the lack of profitability. So very important part of farming. Also farming here at Grassroots, but also she is a master expert canner, and she puts so much food up, just hundreds of jars of tomatoes, pickles, pickled asparagus, salsas, soups, you name it, we've got it in a jar. So we eat really well and are able to share that out through our Wisconsin cottage food bill with customers as well. So I have had the experience of working, or I'm connected to, multi-generation farmers, young farmers, and I have worked in Oregon State on a farm that the person in my generation was the fourth generation farming on that land. And wow, is that a leg up, right? When you spend your entire life around people who know what's going on, they know the best thing to do. It doesn't give you a lot of flexibility to learn lessons on your own, but, to inherit land that's been kept well, equipment that's been kept well, buildings, plus the knowledge, that's different. That's really different than building up a farm from scratch. So it was really interesting to just kind of, compare, how I got into farming and what, my slow progression of adding infrastructure to this farm and gaining experience firsthand is different from those who have, even though it's sometimes an overbearing parent, but have overbearing parents, telling you what's up and giving you the stuff to do it. That's a different setup.
Yeah, completely. What made you want to go down that route even before you had experience at farms and things like that? What was it that drew you to farming?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I would have never guessed, right? It wasn't something I had interest in as a kid. So I've always been, a tomboy, a masculine presenting female. And I was really into, as a young child, just boy stuff, right? Cars and trucks. And I had a really strong kind of appetite or affinity to art and drawing as well. Being outside, sports, things like that. So I was born outside of Chicago, but my parents moved my sister, who's 2 years older, and I to like Silicon Valley area in the 80s because there was jobs in computers there at that time. So I actually spent the first 10-ish years of my life in Southern California. And then my parents decided to divorce, and my mother took my sister and I way up to northern Wisconsin to like very Republican North Woods, Wisconsin, which was an incredible culture shock. And then that's where really my all kinds of things happened at that time. I was 10 years old, and I kind of came out and realized that I was queer. I continued to be a very boyish gal in a small town, and that was a huge challenge. I ended up getting into all kinds of trouble and being very naughty, and drugs and drinking and alcohol and the whole bit, bad decisions, which actually gave me the opportunity to press fast forward on high school and finish it early. So I actually graduated from high school super interested in art. Most of my classes were art classes. I was in, I had an individual education plan because I was considered an at-risk youth. So, would FL have a future with a high school diploma, or wouldn't they? It was a question, but I did end up graduating. I graduated early, and I got into an art school in Philadelphia where I studied art, and at a 4-year women's college. And then I transferred to a more serious and even smaller co-ed art school. And that's when I realized I didn't want to be an artist. I learned a lot, but I couldn't see the career path. My friends who had graduated were waiting tables, right? And I didn't want to teach it. And I just couldn't see how continuing to take out loans and spend money on this type of education was like a good life path. So I looked for something. I took my interest, what was practical. I really liked working with wood. I loved being in the shop. I ended up looking all across the country for a woman to apprentice under that was a cabinet maker, furniture maker, or something with wood. And I didn't find anyone. So I just moved back to near where my mother was and some friends from high school, which landed me in Madison. And I'll get to your question. I didn't forget it. But it landed me in Madison, and I'm looking at the Isthmus newspaper. What am I going to do with my life? I need something. And that's when I found an ad that said something, vegetable farm apprenticeship, which the word apprenticeship was really kind of key to me at that point, because that's what I had in my mind, that I wasn't getting done educated and that I wanted some hands-on learning, even though I wasn't looking for farming apprenticeship, or internship is the word that he used. But so it was, the offer was learn organic vegetable farming, $300 a month stipend. And this was in 2004. I didn't have a lot of responsibilities or debt at that time. I don't even know if I had a cell phone yet. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to call this guy. And as it turned out, we got along really well. And, I didn't even have a driver's license at that point. I had to get a driver's license in order to take that farm job, which was in Stoughton, Wisconsin, just 20 minutes from Madison. So I ended up working at Pleasant Hill Market Garden and had no clue what I was getting into. I just liked vegetables and was a vegetarian, and actually that year converted to a vegan, which is kind of funny because, 10 years later, I raised a lot of livestock, but it's part of the story. So in the end, what I realized, here's answering your question after all the background, is farming is a super creative, sensory, colorful thing to do, right? It's multitasking. It's multiple skill sets, including working with wood. And it's just the variety of weather and the season changing. You're never doing anything too much, right? On a small scale farm, you're working on one thing, and then 3 weeks later you phase out of that and you have a new trajectory, right? It was varied. It's beautiful. I felt like tough, like I was getting through all this weather, and I liked all the gear, the rain boots and and the food was amazing. It transformed my life. I had never eaten so many vegetables. I didn't even know what half of the vegetables are. I did not know, up from down or sideways about what I was doing. I was just kind of doing what I was told, and I really enjoyed it, and it hooked me. Ultimately, I did just stumble into vegetable farming in that way, but it spoke to me because it was practical. It was using my hands. I knew there was a lot to learn. It had a lot of independence built into it, which I felt like I needed, and I still feel like I need. I'm not a plug into a 9-to-5 kind of a worker. So that's how I got into farming.
So at the beginning, when you first started on that farm outside of Madison, what were some of the first things? Because I mean, if I was to go to a farm and start, everything is new to me. So what were the first big lessons that you learned at that farm that shaped, your pursuits in the future?
Good question. I do reference that farm, and it's no longer operational now, but I'm not trash talking it. But ultimately what I learned there is how kind of sloppy or loose, it wasn't contextualized until later, but how you can really kind of push something in the wrong direction or neglect it or be sloppy or not lazy, but just be distracted or not do the right thing at the right time. And you could still get a crop. You might have to dig through weeds that are as tall as you are and find onions this big, but you know what? That's still you still got a crop. It's not efficient. So it kind of set the bar low, but showed me, and I loved the job. And a lot of good produce was grown there, but the methods and systems were not, the best. They weren't the most professional, but I did learn there. Not only did the hook sink into me there that I want to do more of this and I can't get enough of it. And I want to learn more, but also, years later, I realized that the way that farm was being managed was not great, but yet we still succeeded. We still produced beautiful, delicious, healthy vegetables. So that was the most helpful tidbit, I think, from that first year experience.
Yeah, because when you moved on to like the next farm, did that put it in context for you when you were like, oh, well, this is a much better way to do this?
Yeah, totally. You nailed it. That's exactly what it was. I mean, not only it was a bigger farm with more equipment, and it was a farming partnership rather than just one individual trying to manage everything himself. Yeah, it was larger scale and more diverse market channels and just more professional. And even, those folks so the name of that farm that I moved to next, which was outside of Chicago in Grays Lake, Illinois at Prairie Crossing, was called Sandhill Organics. And, I really attribute my 3 years there to giving me an incredible educational base about how to do what now I'm doing so far for the rest of my life. It was really an incredible experience. I pulled a ton of information. I felt like my responsibilities did increase. I managed people. I learned how to, not only operate tractors and equipment, but do it correctly, pay attention to them, make repairs. It was a really good experience. I got a ton of access to Chicago and Chicago markets, which also helped me once we found our land, because I kind of knew where to go and how to do it. So shout out to those folks. I always try to say, hey, Matt and Peg Schaefer, they were really excellent mentors for me. And they still are. As it turns out, they moved to this area, and Matt and I sit on our South Central chapter of Wisconsin Farmers Union board together. We've, flip-flopped the president and vice president role now for that board. So it's cool to still have them in my life.
From like working on farms, when did the decision, or what led up to the decision of you purchasing like your own land and doing it yourself? Because I mean that is a much bigger risk for sure than just working on someone else's farm.
At 4 years in, I just kind of realized I wanted to do it, and my mom, Gail, was totally supportive. She had the financial situation to support the purchase of the land, and has always felt land was a good investment. Not knowing what direction it would go, couldn't be all that bad to be able to afford land, huh? It's pretty amazing, actually. It's very empowering. We decided, so it was kind of me realizing that working for other folks. Well, okay, let me step back a little bit. One of the opportunities that I had at Prairie Crossing and Sandhill Organics was that they were kind of developing an incubator farm program that I was the first kind of experimental candidate with. So they had some extra land at that farm, and I was able to use the equipment at Sandhill, where my day job was, to grow a few of my own crops on this vacant land. And then I actually sold quite a bit of them back to my employers. So I started my own business to do that. And that really gave me the taste for like, hey, I can do this on my own. I can make these decisions. I can hit the timing. I can use the equipment. I can find the markets. I want to do this. So we started watching, for land, and kind of identified that the Madison area, or somewhere in this, golden triangle, we call it, between Milwaukee, Madison, and Chicago, would be a good location. We could kind of see what counties were more affordable at that time. This is, again, back in 2007. And we just kind of started internet shopping for farms and land. I found on the Rodale Institute's website, they used to have this newfarm.org website where there was like they didn't call it land match, but it was like a real estate classifieds, farm classifieds section. Mm-hmm. And there was a little 3-line listing of someone with 40 acres in Greene County, 20 years, no spray, just for sale. I just picked up the phone. I called the number and I talked to the guy. He didn't live out here. There's no house, but he was keeping his dairy herd here that he wasn't milking. They were inactive. And he just said, well, we had a good conversation. He kind of described the land to me. And then he was just like, well, why don't you just feel free to go take a look? So not 30 minutes after seeing the ad, Gail and I hopped in a car and came out here. We got to see this place without anyone, right? It wasn't like ushered with, it wasn't that awkward realtor there, kind of, get cramping your style. We walked the whole place and like the vision was just there. Like I wanted to have, a closed farming system where as much of the fertility as I needed could be harvested from, livestock or neighbors. So what's kind of unique is that we didn't look at 50 farms and then find this one, right? Nor were we in a bidding war to find this place. It just fell into place, right? There was a little bit of some hiccups around the financing and the drama of like, where are we going to get this loan? But ultimately it all fell into place for us, and it wasn't a huge struggle. And then here we were. So yeah, it's beautiful from all directions. It's kind of cool. It's like I describe it as like a 3-sided bowl with 2 valleys that kind of cut into, what would be the bottom of the bowl. So I really only have about 5 acres of flatland, and then the rest of the property is rolling hills down into that flatland, which is a valley with super fertile silt loam soil. So it really lends to pasture rotation and then small scale vegetable farming. I am able to collect a lot of that manure from cattle and other livestock and create a composted product basically, and then use that in my vegetable farming. So, it's long term to really be closed circuit. That's a very lofty goal, because that might also include saving all of my own seeds for vegetables and whatnot, which I'm working on, but not even close. So
that's pretty incredible though. So going from, I don't know if you mentioned if there was like livestock on the other farms, but going from those farms that were primarily like organic vegetables, how did you decide to add livestock and things like that to your farm?
It started small. I feel like laying hens for eggs are kind of the gateway animal, right? Because you're not butchering them. I mean, eventually you are, but it's kind of symbiotic. You can, feed them vegetable scraps or, and get eggs, and, it was like a baby step for me. So that was my first, so maybe I should back up. So my diet, I had mentioned earlier that I did eat vegan as a result of having access to a ton of vegetables, and actually connecting with a PETA volunteer who gave me a flyer that had these terrible pictures of, confinement operations, like livestock confinement. And I was like, ugh, and it just, it happened. And then I was, hardcore and 5 years of veganism. But then I learned more about our food system, and I realized that, here were my farmers market neighbors raising animals on their land in a super respectful, responsible, sustainable way. And I was like boycotting their products to buy, chicken and filet or whatever those chicken patties are from who knows what process. Like I really realized like, wait, I'm not doing the right thing with my diet by boycotting these folks and buying this other processed crap. So my kind of thinking on that changed, and that happened right around when I was starting to, make plans to be out here more and start making a living off this land. And that's when the chickens for eggs came in. I didn't have experience working on farms with anything but laying hens. And that was in Illinois, and I wasn't interested. So my kind of educational or work experience was all in vegetables. Mm-hmm. And then livestock just made sense out here because of how much grass we have and space. I started with the laying hens, really enjoyed having them, loved the eggs. Then a neighbor partner had rescued a little runt pig from some big hog CAFO, and they had it in their house as a pet, and then it got too big and it needed to go somewhere. So then we had Michael the pig, and that was kind of the door opening to, something besides birds. And then from there, I just added more and more. I just gained confidence around keeping them alive, keeping them healthy, using organic feed, utilizing the pasture, which is what we have here. We don't need to irrigate pasture in this part of Wisconsin. It's here. It's a resource. And, animals that eat pasture exclusively are cattle and lamb, right? So that's really what Grassroots Farm, should and could, most efficiently produce. So that's kind of the animal story. In the end, I ended up, raising out a whole lot of different types of animals in a reasonable quantity, got into breeding some of those animals or artificially inseminating them. But then I would offer a winter CSA that was mixed meat and eggs. So everyone got butchered in the fall except for the breeding animals. And I kept birds year round for, laying hens. So then I would, make up that deficit in income for the winter months by selling like a mixed meat and egg CSA that people really loved. And I'm not surprised because it was pretty awesome. I mean, I chose what was in it, but it was a huge variety of everything. People would get a whole chicken. They would get a turkey around Thanksgiving, but, every monthly delivery, they'd get, a whole chicken or two, multiple cuts of beef, lamb, pork, plus a couple dozen eggs. So that was kind of like a good way to make up the income gap for me and bring in, off-season income. But it's a real hamster wheel to be safely, managing livestock and having produce on one farm at the same time. It's a lot, and it's a real juggling act. So that only lasted a couple years.
Yeah. Cause, do you still grow hemp at your farm as well?
Yeah. So in 2018, when the Farm Bill was signed at the end of the year, it really kind of cracked open and a whole new set of opportunities for farmers of all types and just people who are interested in the plant, right? It meant that, hemp was now legal federally under the definition of 0.3% THC or less. So CBD hemp was now legal to grow, transport, and sell. What that meant for our community was like, hey, wow, let's get organized and get into growing this crop. And what we don't have is university or other research institutions to help us. We've got to get together. We don't have a marketing system or any support there. There was red tape left and right. I mean, it just really, the whole scenario lended towards forming a cooperative business of farmers, which is exactly what we did here in South Central Wisconsin. We named the co-op South Central Wisconsin Hemp Cooperative, and that was formed in February 14th of 2019. So really just 6 weeks after the Farm Bill, we organized a group of folks. Some had been farming, some just had a little bit of land and were generally interested in this new opportunity. And we decided to grow and market certified organic CBD hemp as a single business entity. Well, as a cooperative, right? The way that we engage with the co-op is through our businesses. So 9 producer farms got together, totaling about 20 people, and we went at it together and we supported each other, learning how to grow the crop for the first time, certified organic, USDA certified organic on all of our different farms. As it turns out, despite all the paranoia and the chaos of growing a crop like hemp, where there's actually no data or information or resources on how to do it in Wisconsin because it had never been done before. Although we have a rich history of fiber hemp growing here, that's completely different production system. And that was, 70 years ago. So we did it. And it turns out CBD hemp grows really well here outdoors. Yes, it gets pollinated, but no, that doesn't keep us from growing CBD, right? We still grew really good quality CBD together. That was 2019, 2020. So everyone had that idea. I want to say a lot of people in Wisconsin, the Midwest, the U.S. had a really good idea to grow CBD hemp. Maybe it wasn't certified organic, and we were kind of hoping that would be, a way to differentiate ourselves as a co-op and as certified organic. But as it turns out, a lot of people grew CBD hemp, and there still is a huge oversupply of what we call biomass, the, raw dried product of just, crunched up or stripped off CBD flower. There's a ton of it. It's still sitting around in people's sheds all over Wisconsin. In 2020, we found financing as a co-op to extract some of our CBD hemp biomass and start and launch CBD oil as our first set of products. So what an adventure it's been. Then the pandemic hit. So we extracted our hemp in January, and it took months to, make all the decisions, all the testing, the manufacturing process, the label design, the UPC codes, the website, many, many, many steps, lots of time, lots of conversations, tons of group work, lots of committee work, all basically volunteer without staff from our farmer members. And in June, our products, were in our hands in June, and we were thrilled, and we just started selling as members, and we started doing our wholesale reach outs. But by then, people weren't shopping inside stores as much. They're shopping more online, right? That was had already kind of shifted the culture of our society by then. One thing that's very challenging about having CBD products, whether you make them or not, maybe you just want to sell them because you're a small business and you want to support our co-op, and you're already using an online platform, right? Maybe another farmer. It's not impossible, but extremely challenging to find a payment processor that will allow you to sell CBD hemp products. And if you're small scale, good luck. Because if you can't, prove to them or show to them that you already have this like badass e-commerce site, or a record of sales, or, they make it very hard for you to connect that. On the other hand, with our community kitchen co-op, it took me literally 30 minutes to get us connected to sell food, right? To sell meal shares, to get the payment processor connected to our bank account, did a test, good to go, right? 30 minutes. We've been working on trying to get our co-op's product online through an online storefront, through our own website since May of last year. So we're working on 12 months of, almost daily, communicating, thinking, waiting back and forth, different companies, getting blacklisted because of unknown reasons. Like, we didn't have the history of sales. And so it's been incredibly challenging. And I really feel for folks out there who aren't part of a team of 20, who don't co-own a business like a co-op with each other and have support, because certainly they probably wouldn't have been able to move forward or spent $10,000 to get some professional company to do it for them. So that's been not only a COVID related challenge that has not really worked in our favor because we're still not online, but also just like an industry issue. The government it was a big deal when that hemp bill was signed, because what wasn't there was government led research on CBD, regulations on how to approach it. The FDA still has not made a ruling as to whether or not it's considered safe, if it can be infused into food and beverages for humans or used in pet products. Those things are all still illegal. People have pursued creating them, and you see them everywhere because the FDA is not enforcing, the lack of regulation at this point. But, that scenario, or that has not helped this young market and us smaller players get a piece of it, right, to thrive, or it's just barrier after barrier, So that being said, one thing of note about cooperative businesses is there are 7 cooperative principles that I think are fantastic. And if you do too, I'm like, hey, join a co-op or start one, because if everyone can agree on these 7 principles, and a mission and vision, they're going to be a good team. But one of the principles is cooperation among cooperatives, and that has completely happened for us. Most of our wholesale partners that are retailing our products in southern and central Wisconsin, they are other co-ops, worker co-ops, grocery co-ops, a supply chain co-op, like a gas station co-op. They took a chance on us. We shared values. We're a co-op. We do have product in stores, and people really love our product, but not being able to kind of access a stream of revenue from online has really limited, plus the pandemic has really limited, our ability to break out quickly. But we're still here, and we have a very solid structure. And what we want to be known for as a co-op is quality, transparency, and education. We will go the extra mile to help customers, learn about CBD and our product and why our farming practices and our co-op is different and good. So yeah, it's a long-term project.
Yeah. Cause I mean, just based on what you're saying, it almost feels like the government thought it was good enough to just be like, yeah, you can do this now, and then not give any guidance. But in reality, it was actually not helpful to do it that way. And I've heard you talk about this before, which is why I was interested to hear it now. But when they first passed that and allowed, farmers and people to grow, was there a lot of sort of nervousness because other states had already done that so far? for like 4 or 5 years or whatever, how long they've been allowing to grow hemp, and having those people come to Wisconsin and basically take advantage of the situation that they have all this knowledge now and they know all this stuff, and you guys don't know as much, that they can just sort of get that market too.
That's exactly what happened, Sam. That's exactly what happened. And it's also this thing about, that's what happened, because certainly Wisconsin producers, the states that were making CBD products, or the places where those products were legal, were those recreational or medical cannabis states, right? The infrastructure was already there. The production knowledge was there, and those products already existed, right? When the door was opened on December 31st of 2018 with the Farm Bill signage, we were, hemp prices, like CBD biomass prices at that time, were really good. And that's why there was all this attention from farmers who desperately needed some income stream to help keep them on their farms and afloat. Why we all jumped into it, because we were like, wow, there's good money in this. And there was a ton of buzz from the consumer standpoint. But what happened was, stores brought product in from those cannabis states in January of 2019, right? The Farm Bill was signed on the last day of 2018. So 2019, there's product on shelves, right? Some of it is crap. Some of it doesn't even have CBD in it. It's just olive oil and it says CBD on it. But because of that lack of regulation, again, that wasn't in place and still really isn't in place. That's where we're waiting for the FDA to, say something, do something. We'll work with whatever. We have preferences as growers and manufacturers. But anyway, that's exactly what happened. People not only descended on the state with out-of-state product of varying quality that was turnkey ready to sell, but something else happened. A lot of folks started getting together at different grower events that, private companies were putting on. They were offering brokerage services. Some university extension agents called for educational programming on hemp. And it was a really incredible time, that first, I'd say 6 months until the growing season really started in 2019, where like, if you said hemp and an event and education, hundreds of people would show up. Like, you'd have 40 Amish folks and then, 100 conventional row crop farmers, and then 30, cannabis people, all coming into the same event to try to learn about growing the crop, make connections. But the other thing that was happening in terms of like out-of-state influences descending on our state was that there were a lot of farmers that, kind of drank the Kool-Aid of the offers they were getting from corporations that, had processing equipment out of state. They were offering contracts to grow hundreds of acres that they ultimately, in many cases, never, had the fine print there where they could not make their promises of their contract, right? And we saw that coming because, on one hand, if you're a dairy producer, you have to have a contract. You can't milk 100 cows and not know where your milk is going to go that week, right? Vegetable farmers, we don't use contracts as much. I mean, it's nice to have a verbal contract with like a restaurant, and obviously our CSA customers, it's a contract that they give us their money, and now we need to give them their vegetables. But there was a lot of kind of misinformation floating around at that time. People were setting up to grow way more CBD than was necessary. They didn't know the ins and outs of production, and neither did those companies that came in with all the answers and the money and the resources and the equipment and the contract to buy. They didn't know how to grow CBD in Wisconsin either, because this is not high altitude Colorado. Mm-hmm. You can't just cut a CBD plant in Wisconsin in the fall and leave it on the ground and think that you're going to have a, ready to buck and process product. We have very high moisture falls. Our late summer, our summer, we're high humidity here. You need to have an active drying situation, and nobody knew that, right? So a lot of farmers were conned into entering contracts, especially large scale producers that had a lot of expenses and a lot more to lose than us smaller setups. they either did or did not grow hemp successfully. We haven't even touched on the compliance testing that the state put together for the THC, right? That's a whole another nightmare that was very stressful and ruined a lot of livelihoods, just to be blunt. From an arbitrary number, 0.3% is not based on science. It is completely arbitrary. But anyway, that was kind of some of the maliciousness that happened to farmers in the state. In the end, some of those contracts were written to pay those farmers what the market pricing was, which at the time was like really good, right? When they signed the contract. So, a little bit of CBD, like an acre of CBD creates a lot of those bottles, right? Even one plant. If you grow a plant that gives you roughly a pound of dried material and you extract it and bottle it into like 1,000 milligram CBD product, you will get roughly and say your plant was about 10% CBD, right? This is all ballpark numbers, but you will get roughly 40 bottles of 1,000 milligram product, which is still in this area of Wisconsin being sold. I mean, prices are coming down, but it's still being sold for as much as $75 or $100 a bottle.
Whoa.
You can get that from one plant that's like as big as me.
Yeah.
And it's really easy. It's really easy to grow. So anyway, a lot of stuff happened then the pandemic. I don't think there's been one hemp event in 2020. A lot of people are still sitting on their product from 2019. It's been a real roller coaster and something else. So the market's going to stabilize, right? The flash in the pan manufacturers, producers, retailers, they will move on to their next project. Our co-op is going to be here when the dust settles. But, an interesting kind of factor too is just, the product CBD oil itself, right? Every product has its own lifespan, that was kind of like the basic starter product. And now you can find CBD in all forms, any kind of salve or spray or vape pen or flower itself, edibles, they're everywhere, even though they're not technically federally legal yet. We chose to make that product because it was basic, because it was simple, and because we could certify it organic with just 2 ingredients. And part of our challenge is it was hard to find space on shelves for that product, even though we were checking all the boxes, checking many of the boxes. So that's kind of like where we're at now is, just kind of assessing what kind of co-op do we want to be? How do we want to be in this industry? We're farmers. How do we farm and just capture value for our work? That's all we ever wanted. How do we serve our community with CBD, like the people close by? And how do we get this product out to more folks in the form that they feel comfortable giving it a shot and knowing that it's safe? I want to contextualize my interest in hemp with my food systems work and passion, in that I saw hemp as an opportunity to build in the co-op specifically, to build a structure to help support food farmers who were not being profitable, right? So a way to diversify our income through growing a little bit of hemp and making really good money on it, and then maybe supporting the other parts of our business that are related to food production that are not that profitable. So I kind of felt like, taking the lead with one of our co-founders, Steve Atchison, and I really felt like it was bigger than just growing and marketing hemp, right? It was like putting the time and the effort into creating a system that would not only bring more diversity to farming in people, but also in income streams, ultimately allow me to make the cash to build a commercial kitchen to create the meal CSA that I felt was also a need. In the end, the money has not come through with hemp, right? We're still working on it. But what I have gained is the experience and knowledge of setting up a co-op. And I use that every single day with the community kitchen co-op. It's not that I made bank and now can inject it into a different business doing my true passion. It's that, the learnings of South Central Hemp and being there from, day one, and organizing a co-op and all the structure and conversations and group work and leadership and public speaking and all of that is going to be what helps Community Kitchen co-op, as my contribution to help us thrive. So that's just kind of the way the story went. And I just kind of realized that a couple months ago, that it's not the money, it's the experience from the hemp co-op that's going to help me do this work.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about, you mentioned this a little bit, that Wisconsin was one of the leading producers of, was it fiber hemp? Is that what it was in the 40s?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
How does that differ from, because I don't really know much about this. How does it differ from like what you are doing currently?
Yeah, totally. This is important and part of the education piece to just differentiate. There are actually 5 different, types of cannabis so far. One of them, we all know, marijuana, right? Mm-hmm. It has high THC and also other cannabinoids like CBD in it. So that's one thing, right? Only legal in, I think it's like 20 states now. That's one type of cannabis. Another type is CBD. So that's very low THC and higher in other cannabinoids like CBD. That is federally legal now. Then we have grain hemp, which is grown in more arid areas of the world, including Canada and like central plains of the U.S. That's a seed that also has super low THC or none, and very low CBD as well, but not none, but still very low percentages. And in some varieties probably have almost none. But so that's a high protein grain that's grown for food. And that's where your hemp milk, your hemp seed, your hemp breads, things like that come from. Side note, Canada is the number one supplier of hemp grain. In the U.S. is the number one buyer of Canada's hemp grain. And they, as of a year ago, were sitting on a pretty huge oversupply. So, I don't know, if the market for grain hemp is really, going to be that profitable of one until some, U.S. supply chain stuff gets worked out. But that can't really be grown reliably here in this part of the Midwest because of the same thing that I explained earlier about having high moisture in the fall. One thing that I learned out in Oregon was you can't grow seeds in a moist environment around harvest time, right? Because the seeds will actually start to sprout on the stalk. And that, you don't want moisture in your grain of any kind, whether it's seed or food or whatever. A large mass of seeds with moisture in it is going to be mold and rot and expensive to dry down. So there's the grain hemp, which is kind of a shorter, maybe like waist high product plant with a lot of grain, like the seed head up at the top. I didn't mention this before, but marijuana and CBD can be like very bushy, like a Christmas tree with, a single stem and branches with flowers, or like something smaller, like a bush, right? So they differ in that they also have really different spacing. So you grow grain, you grow a lot of it, and you grow it in rows really close together. Because you're harvesting it mechanically, right? And marijuana and CBD can be grown at large scale and harvested mechanically, but generally speaking, it's a smaller batched plant that's cared for by hand. Although there's examples of hundreds of acres of CBD being grown basically like a row crop. But anyway, then you have fiber hemp. Fiber hemp is kind of amazing and incredible, and I feel like it's going to have a completely different and much slower trajectory than CBD has had in terms of like building the market, building the infrastructure, getting it planted, figuring out how to grow it. Fiber hemp is also very low in CBD and THC and almost no THC, so very low risk for growers on that respect. But fiber hemp can grow to be 10 feet tall. Wow. And you plant fiber hemp depending on what market it's going towards, right? So the kind of components of the plant are the center of the stalk is this like pulpy white stuff called the hurd. And that is what goes into like pressed paper production, hempcrete, hemp plastics. There's thousands of products you can make from the inside of the plant stalk. The outside is called bast, B-A-S-T, and that's where the fiber comes from. So like, clothing, rope, all, again, thousands of products can be made from the bast of the plant. So, depending on what market you're growing for, although you do get some of each, no matter how you grow your fiber hemp, you plant your fiber hemp at different spacing. So if you are growing for bast and you're going to sell to, a manufacturer who's going to create a fiber that then becomes a fabric that goes to become Patagonia clothes, for example, you would plant your fiber hemp super close together, because then you would get skinny, spindly, tall plants and you get a ton of the fiber, right? The bast. If you were growing for hempcrete or paper or, hemp plastic, that's where you want that center component called hurd, and you would plant farther apart and you get like tree trunks. And then that then goes on to be processed, stripped from each other, and you get your hurd and your bast, and then further processing from there. So that's kind of the story of fiber hemp. And then the fifth kind of category, so to speak, of cannabis is like what we call in Wisconsin ditchweed. So it's like land-based cannabis. It's cannabis that has basically thrived and evolved on its own without human intervention or cultivation. And in our case, in this area of Wisconsin, we have a lot of ditchweed, landrace, whatever, wild hemp, basically, that has survived on its own despite the authorities' attempt to eradicate it, which they do have the authority to do and have tried to pull it out and burn it and cut it down and whatever for years. That's what's left over from the fiber industry that was number 2 in the country back in the 50s and beyond. So what happened was there was a prohibition on all kinds of cannabis that made growing fiber hemp illegal. This was like post-war time. So what happened was basically the cotton lobby came in and was like, marijuana's bad and it's related to fiber hemp. So this whole set of plants needs to be illegal because they're too close together. And plus they're, competing in our markets and we want to take over on exploited. That happened. Marijuana prohibition knocked fiber hemp out as an industry. But because of the nature of the plant, in that there's male and female plants, no matter what type of cannabis, it basically survived. And over the past 70 years, it's been reseeding itself and evolving to survive on its own since then. So what that means is we have wild cannabis that grows. It looks like cannabis. It has cannabis leaves, but it has very dinky little flowers that can have as much as 3% THC in them in the wild, which is why the police want to get rid of them. However, from experience, for me, there's nothing positive about smoking ditchweed. It gives you a headache, right? It doesn't really have enough good cannabinoids. The reason that it has become so high in THC, because the function of THC in a cannabis plant is to protect the plant from pests and disease. So because we weren't there, cultivating it and caring for it, it's had to kind of combat all of those threats by itself. And that's why naturally over time, the THC has risen in the plant, basically as a self-protectant. There was a lot of fear around the presence of that wild hemp and giving off pollen. There was a lot of fear that that would affect our ability to grow CBD hemp in Wisconsin. And I know that there's a lot of like pollen wars out west where, CBD fiber and grain producers are impacting marijuana crops because the CBD can be lowered when the plant, it generally is lowered when the plant is fertilized, right? So when the females, which is what is being grown for flower and CBD and marijuana, when the female gets pollinated, it will form seeds, which, basically lowers its value. So I know that's an issue and it's really tough because pollen from hemp can travel 15 miles, whatever direction it wants. So I know that's an issue, but in the end, there was a lot of fear. We didn't even know, were we going to get a crop? Oh no, there's seeds that got pollinated. Turns out you can grow, CBD strains that become pollinated from feral hemp pollen that's just floating around the universe out here, and still grow, 10 or more % CBD outdoors. And for us, that's plenty to still potentially be profitable through marketing products, right? So that's kind of the story about the 5 types of cannabis and how, it's really important to talk about them like they're totally separate, because they each, the most similar are really marijuana and CBD in terms of production. But there's even differences and discrepancies there. There's a lot of things that are done for marijuana that are not necessary for CBD, because we don't want the THC to spike. We're actually kind of doing the opposite things, but ultimately really similar plant.
Yeah, so. No, that's awesome. I mean, I learned something, just that I learned a bunch of stuff. So I love to learn and hear about stuff like that. So I want to ask, where can people find more about your farm, about the co-ops, the South Central Hemp Cooperative, and the newer co-op that you're starting as well? Where can people find all that information?
Cool. Thanks for asking that. So our hemp co-op is online. We have social media accounts with Facebook and Instagram at South Central Hemp. And we also have a website with tons of information, including producer profiles and info on CBD and, Wisconsin hemp advocacy and legislation and everything. Lots of information. That's at southcentralhemp.coop. My farm I have a website, but I'm not really engaging in direct marketing, and my website's pretty bare bones. So there's not much there, but you can, read a little bit about Grassroots Farm at grassrootsfarmllc.com. And our new kitchen co-op, we're launching our website this weekend. It's most relevant to people who live in Green, Rock, Lafayette, or Dane County. So like Madison included, because we are offering a local meal service, but we always designed it to share with others. So if there's folks listening that are interested in food systems, glean any information you can from our model, send us an email. We would love to share what we have learned or what we're doing, or collaborate in any way, learn from each other. And that website is communitykitchen.coop.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time. I really appreciate it. I'll have to, at some point, come up and visit the farm. I would love to come and see it in person at some point.
That would be awesome, Sam. You're welcome anytime.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and have a great day.